Good evening, everybody. Happy Monday. I'm gonna give some time. It's not 7 yet, but welcome. Happy Monday. I'm super excited about today's conversation. but I will say that I went to Pilates last night, Solid Core in West Hartford, and they almost took me out. It almost took me out. And we worked on obliques and we worked on like core, like, just really like the core area. And I will say that I 100% dislike it. That's it. That is my rant. But good evening, everyone. It's your girl, Dr. Tasha Rose, and I am here today to have a conversation about your vote is your voice and why our community cannot afford to stay quiet. That is what we're going to be talking about today or this evening. I am not a politician. I don't want to be. I just think that it's so important to kind of talk a little bit about voting and the importance of it, because this past August 11th was not good. And the people that were voted in the primary, that congratulations to everyone, right? But I'm more concerned with how the turnout of, especially the Democratic Party, turned out. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about that, especially in the Hartford County and maybe other cities, but mostly just like the Hartford and Connecticut Democrats, because it's so important for us to understand why we vote, why we receive the right to vote, and if we don't vote, what does that do for us and our communities and the laws and everything that's happening. And so, I think the first thing I want to just ask you is, what is a primary? Like, I feel like a lot of people don't really understand voting and the different parts of voting. And so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that, just so you can have an idea, because I think that's where people are getting a little dysregulated, or just really not understanding that your vote is your voice and your vote matters. So you can't just vote in the general elections. You have to vote also in your primary, and you have to do a little bit of research and get to know the people enough to make a decision, right? I'm not saying that every person that you vote for or every candidate is going to be the best candidate, but it's always the best candidate for you, who you feel will be the best person. It should never be, well, they all lied, I don't trust nobody. It should never be that, because even when you don't vote, you're voting. So it's so important to use that. So I want to just talk about what is a primary, right? So it helps, a primary helps a political party choose its nominee for the general election. Connecticut uses a closed party, the closed party primary. So basically, it's like you need to be a part of a party, Democrat, Republican, stuff like that. And then you vote towards who's going to become the name on the ballot in the general election, right? And that is what the primary is. So like when we have these little primaries in the summer and different times of the year, it's so important that you vote, because if you don't vote in the primary, by the time you get to the general, we got people in the seats that we don't want there, but we can't do nothing about it because you either didn't vote or you voted for the wrong person. I don't know. But you have to make sure that you're voting in the primary so you can get the right candidate to go into the general election. right? So our last primary was August 11th, and we voted for senators, we voted for representatives, and we voted for governor. And I'm going to just tell you right now, only 23% of Democrats in Connecticut voted this year. 23% in the primary. And that's not just like, I'm not saying like, oh, that's only at Hartford. That's throughout. Like, people are really not voting. And I really think it's because people don't understand voting rights and they don't understand what a primary is. And I think that is so important that we talk about those things, right? And then we know that if you wait to November to vote, choices have already been made, decisions have already been put down. And then when the general election come, all these people are voting, but look who's on there. And you're like, I don't like none of these people. But if you would have voted in the primary, then it might have been a different candidate and a better candidate, right? So the general election is where voters choose among candidates who qualified on the ballot to determine the office that they will hold, and that is during the primaries, right? The 2026 is a midterm election year, so not a presidential election year, but the midterm election. But major federal and state offices are still on the ballot. Connecticut has early voting for the November general election, and it's scheduled for October 19th through November 1st of this year. So just remember those dates. You can do early voting from October 19th through November 1st for the general election. So then you also have the federal versus state government. So you have the U.S. House of Representatives, which Connecticut believe has 5 congressional districts and therefore 5 U.S. representatives. So the House members serve 2 years. So the representatives that we voted for senators and governors, I believe we voted for the primary. My bad. However, in the general election, we will be voting for representatives. Where was I? And then the U.S. senators, we have 2 of them, and they serve about 6 years, 6 terms, right? 6-year terms. Congress writes federal legislation, appropriate federal funds. They appropriate federal funds, and then they conduct oversight and carry out other constitutional duties. So that's what the Senate does. The House of Representatives kind of represents the different congressional districts of Connecticut, and then the senators, they represent Connecticut as a whole from the two areas in which they're serving. So I think our senators right now would be on the ballot will be is it Clyburn, and I think what's his name? Bronin. I think those are the 2 that's going to be for us this year. And then for in our area, it's going to be Khan and Bronin, I believe. All right. So Connecticut has 151 state representatives and 36 state senators. So Connecticut state legislators serves 2 terms, and they make state laws and act on issues including the state budget, education, housing, public safety, and health, transportation, taxes, and social services. So these are the things that Connecticut General Assembly does, right? Sometimes we are watching Washington while decisions affecting our daily lives are being debated right here in Hartford. So we have to make sure that we're just not looking at what's going on in Washington, but we're looking at what's going on in Connecticut, in Hartford, right? Or Connecticut, because sometimes we get a little bit disheveled, or we get a little bit too indoctrinated into what's going on in Washington. We're not paying attention to what's going on in our states, in our towns, and that is important. So you have to pay attention to what's going on here so that you can make the right decision to send the right person to Washington. Right? So who does what? So we know that the governor leads Connecticut executive branch, administers state government, proposes a budget, signs or vetoes legislation, and makes appointments and set executive priorities. We know that the lieutenant governor is like the vice principal, right? Serves with the governor and a president of the Connecticut Senate, including cast tie breaking votes. So anytime you hear like a lieutenant governor, vice president, those are the people who are like right underneath the person in charge that pretty much will be the tiebreaker. Secretary of State oversees important election administration functions and business records. Attorney General is the Connecticut chief legal officer and represents the state's legal interests. The treasurer oversees major state financial assets, investments, debts, and related financial responsibilities. The comptroller oversees state financial administration and reporting and performs other statutory financial functions. And then we have the judge of probate, which handles matters assigned to probate courts, including estates and other matters. And then the registrar of voters, which is a local election official responsible for voter registration and election administration duties. If you have questions on voter registration, that's who you need to be reaching out to, your register of voters. And those people will help you have a better understanding on how do you get registered to vote and what's the process, right? A lot of time we don't know these things until it's time to vote. So all the things, all the titles that I've read out to you, these are people that are put into spaces, into their positions by who we vote for. And if we don't vote for the right people, we don't get the right people or the people that we want in these seats. So that I read off that because it's important to understand how voting rights are, why they're important, and how we have a voice. So those people are placed in places due to our votes. And if we don't vote, then they're put in by the people who do vote, or they're put in by the people who don't vote, right? Because does that make sense? Like if you don't vote, then whatever votes come in, they're going to win. The majority is going to win. So even though you don't vote and you feel like whatever, then you have to deal with the consequences of not voting. But if you actually put a little bit of effort in and do some research, then you might just get the right person or the right people voting. So, it's so important to make sure that you are voting, because your vote is your voice. And without voting, you're giving someone else your voice. And then we complain, right? So in this last primary, which was on the 11th of August, Ned Lamont did, win to be kind of like reinstated as governor, to be on the ballot for the general election. So he did defeat Josh Elliott by 68% to Josh Elliott's 32%. So that's a big win for Lamont. But now he has to go against the Republican opponent. And so that is also going to be major in November when we vote, because that is when we have to make sure that we vote. Like I said, only 23% of Democrats voted. I am only talking about Democrats because I'm a Democrat, right? And I know I have friends, I have family members who are Republicans, but I'm a Democrat, so I can only talk about the Democratic Party. That's all I know about really right now. First congressional district Democrat primary was former Mayor Luke Bronin defeated longtime rep, which is Larson. Larson has been in office for 28 years, y'all. And Larson has done some amazing things around our area. And, honestly, I don't really know how to feel. But at the end of the day, Luke Bronin will be on the ballot for the Democratic Party in the general election. And then we also had a state Senate Democratic primary where Miriam Khan won by 3,500 votes to Doug McCrory, who was in that seat. He only had about 2,200 votes. So she will be the candidate on the ballot for the primary. And so again, it was only 23% of registered Democrats that voted this year, y'all. And that's horrible. They're saying something like 1 out of every 4 people voted. That's crazy. So we have to get our voices out there. We have to get up and vote. We have to. It's not something that we can just keep on sitting and hoping that things will just change or things will turn around. Because if you don't vote, then how do you even expect to have a voice? Why are you complaining if you're not even getting out there and casting a vote, even if you don't really know much? Like right now, you can Google anybody, any party, and read about them. I just look at it, sometimes the people are being lazy. That's what I think. People are being lazy sometimes. People are overwhelmed. People are okay with being illiterate. People are okay with being ignorant, and we have to be a little bit more open about the decisions that we're making when we either decide not to vote or we decide to vote for people who we like and not vote for the best candidate that's for our communities. So basically, again, when I saw that only 23% of Democrats that's registered in the state of Connecticut voted, I was like appalled. 23%. Anyway, I think it's like 50,000 people voted. Let's see. And I also think about the fact that how does this impact the Black and brown communities, right? We struggle because many of us don't get up and go out and vote. And then we have people that are coming into our cities and our towns making decisions that are not best for us. And, if we're not voting, if we're not taking the time to educate our community about the importance of primary voting and educating our communities about voting, then we will lose out on opportunities to make change within our communities, right? We have to really analyze how we're getting the word out, how we're educating people in our towns and helping them to understand the importance of voting. We've only had our voting rights as Black and brown people or Black people since 1965. That is not a long time, y'all. So think about some of your grandparents who did not have the right to vote, right? So, for the most part, many people these days, all their parents were born with the right to vote. I was born with the right to vote, but I have mom and dad who were not born with the right to vote. So the importance of it is super important to me because they taught me about voting, especially my father. He was really big with helping me to understand why at 18 I need to make sure I was registered. And I was super excited too that my 20-year-old woke up on August 11th and sent out a text message and letting people know that we needed to make sure we voted today. And, I love that because at 20 years old, she understands the importance of voting. And so for me, that's why I'm really big with saying, did you vote today? And I just remember asking people, did you vote? And they're like, well, I don't know who to vote for. Okay, what would you like to know? I can give you a few minutes. Are you registered? Yeah, I'm registered, but I don't know who to vote for. Okay, let's talk about some things. Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you unaffiliated? And being able to have those quick conversations and getting 2 and 3 people to go into their areas and vote. And to me, I did my part, right? But sometimes people just don't know what to do. And I think that's why we have to educate and help people understand that our votes are our voices for what's happening within our communities, right? We have to make sure that we're doing what we need to do in order to get the information out. And I'm going to also put this back on our reps and are the candidates, right? I don't only want to hear from you when it's a voting year. I don't only want to see you guys' faces out when it's time to get people to vote. You need to be out more in the communities, in the schools, so that people see your faces all the time, so they know who you are. So when it is time to vote, they know who to vote. for, and what the things that you have been doing and how you're giving back to the community, so they know who you are. Because what ends up happening is that I noticed that when it's time, especially in the cities and the black and brown towns, I only see the reps when it's time to vote. And if I do see them other places, it's like they keep themselves in only political spaces. And it's like, no, you got to be in the community. You got to go and talk to the people throughout the years. You can't just talk when it's almost time for voting, because people need to know who you are, because some people just don't understand politics. So that is really important as well. In the Hartford area, the first congressional district results show that long-serving incumbent can lose a primary when not enough voters choose another direction. So basically, that just means that either people don't vote or they vote for something else. So although we are a Democratic district, if the people don't come out and vote, or the people don't vote for that particular person, then we can lose our Democratic district pretty much, right? We'll vote for someone else. We need to also make sure that when we're selecting a person, we need to know, or we need to feel like that person is going to do something for us, right? For our community, because they're working for us, y'all. Our tax dollars are paying their salaries. So we have to understand, like, it's kind of like like when they come out, it's kind of like they're interviewing us to pick them for a job. But if we're only allowing them to come and interview when they're down on their luck, then we're having a disservice too. Like, we're doing an injustice for our community because we're giving them time. It's like, no, you need to be around here more. We need to be talking to them, reaching out to them, asking them, what are we doing about this situation? How can we fix this situation? All through the year. We should not be allowing them to come to us for an interview only when they need something from us. We need to be having them do the work so that they can work for us and show us that they care about our needs, right? We also need to understand that, again, I'm going back to the primary because I think that's a big thing. People need to understand why you need to vote in the primary, not just in the general. So before you start voting, right, first of all, you need to be registered. And then you need to ask yourself, do you know whether you are enrolled in a political party or are you unaffiliated? And unaffiliated could just mean something like an independent voter, right? A lot of people say I'm independent, but unaffiliated means you can vote for either one, right? Republican or Democrat, or I think they have like they do have like an independent party. I could be wrong. Do you know where? Do you know there was a Connecticut primary? Blah blah blah. Like, you want to ask yourself, when was our last primary, or when's the next primary, right? And look that up. Do you know your state representative and state senators? Do you know these things? These are questions that you need to ask yourself, other than just, am I a registered voter? What else you should do? Do you know your U.S. representative? That's also important. What issues matter most to you locally, right? Have you researched how your elected officials have handled those issues that you're most concerned with, right? Do you vote in primaries and local state elections, or mainly just presidential elections? Like, these are questions that you need to ask yourself when you do register to vote. These are questions that you need to ask yourself so that you can make sure that you're researching and you're making the best decision for you and your community. Do you what keeps people in your community from voting, right? Because if I'm someone who's new at voting, I want to be around other people that might be new at voting, and so that we can learn together, and so we can maybe get people to come out and vote, right? Do people stop participating because they feel unheard, or feel unheard partly because they are not consistently participating? Some people don't consistently participate in politics, so therefore they only vote when they feel like it, right? How can we engage young adults without telling them what to think? I am really big with helping young people research for themselves. I give a little bit and then I say, check this out, read this article, do this, ask those questions, right? Reach out to um, one of these representatives, one of these candidates. Reach out to them, see if their committee would reach back out to you. Ask the questions to see if those questions get asked. I mean, get answered. Sometimes we have to do the work for ourselves and stop blaming others. Are we teaching our children how government actually works? The answer is probably no. We teach our children how to stay safe from the police. We teach them, what to do when they're, out in the street. But are we teaching them why it's important to vote at a young age, so that when they turn 18 they're excited about casting their vote and they want to understand it? I do believe, because my daughters have been in a space where I used to take them with me to vote and I would talk to them, I do think that makes them excited about voting. But I also feel, because I know they both have had their own experience of government and understanding a little bit about it. So, I think the more is like, the more you teach as when they're younger, the more they're gonna want to vote, right? And then we have like this group of young people between the age of like 25 and 35 that really don't vote, and we have to be better with that. And then we have another chunk of people from 50 to 60 that's not voting. And so we have to figure out, how do we close these gaps? And so these are questions that you ask yourself when you register. Like, you may be registered, but why aren't you voting? Or are you going to be voting? Or do you understand why your vote is important? Or do you even understand why you're registering? Right? So if your vote is your voice, what happens when you choose not to use it? Nothing gets done. So you don't have the right to complain. Right? Know your ballot. Questions, that you want to ask, or before you vote, you also want to know what's on your ballot. What office is the person running for? What authority does the office actually have? What has the candidate done previously? If the candidate is an incumbent, what is their voting and public service record? Right? What have they been doing to make you feel like it's okay to vote for them again? What policies are they proposing? What do they say about education, mental health, housing, tax, public safety, healthcare, small business, and children's and families? These are great questions to ask when you're researching for a candidate for especially the Hartford or Black and Brown communities, because these are the things that are important to these communities. Are their claims supported by reliable sources? Don't just Google. You might need to actually go and get a newspaper. You might need to go to the library so that you can get real resources. Am I choosing based on facts or simply repeating something I saw on social media? I'm gonna tell you right now, there has been so many times where I've talked to people and they have these bogus ideas of people. And I'm like, where'd you get that information? Oh, this was on TikTok. I'm like, stop listening to TikTok. Like, go get some facts, some actual facts. And I always say, go to the library, go to your local library, ask them for newspaper articles, ask them, for sites that you can use if you're struggling with understanding about, voting rights and all those things. We don't use our libraries enough, and they're there for a reason, and they're very helpful. Um, I got to give you a scripture, guys. So it's Proverbs 31:8 and 9 says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, defend the rights of the poor and needy. So this scripture can be discussed as a voice, right? It's about having a responsibility for justice and to care for your community, not as an endorsement of a party or candidate. It's not always about Republican or Democrat. It's who's best for our communities. But if we don't know enough, then we can't vote properly for that. We can disagree politically and still treat one another with dignity. That's also an important fact, right? So we have to make sure that we are voting, we are using our voices to vote for the right person or the right parties or for our community. But first we have to understand why we vote. We were not always privy to voting. and many people lost their lives to or for us to vote. So when I hear people speak negatively about candidates or about laws that need to be changed, the first question I ask them is, do you vote? Because you can't constantly complain about what's happening around us, but you're not doing anything to make a change. And so this, I would say, over the last 3 years since I've been in practice, I'm learning more and more about the importance of me showing up and voting and learning more about what's happening in my community, because I've been working with so many people and seeing so many things and seeing and hearing about resources that I've never heard of before, but being able to give those resources that I'm finding out and researching to my clients because they need them, right? And so I'm learning that I got to be a little bit more vocal and a little bit more out there when it comes to just within my community and what's happening. But I will tell you one thing, I'm always looking at what people are doing within our community, if they have a role in our community. I'm always reading, I'm always paying attention, I'm always watching if people are just doing, you know, they just have photo creds. I don't need to know every 5 minutes that you're helping somebody with a photo, right? I see people, even when people come to my church, like when it's time for, like during the election, people would come to my church and they wouldn't even stay for the service. They just come and speak and then they leave, and it's like, why won't you stay for the service? Like, you come into a community, you say vote for me, but you won't even fellowship with them. Those are the things that I don't like. You say that you're here for the community, but you can't fellowship with them. You come into these churches, you come into these places and you speak. They give you the space to speak, but you won't stay in fellowship. And sometimes that's the space that you want to sit and maybe fellowship and get to know, so people can know you. But when people see you coming in and out of churches and stuff like that, and that's supposed to be a space where they feel like, okay, they can talk to you, but you're not even staying to fellowship, or you're not even coming by during the times when it's not voting time, I feel like that's a big hit in the face for the community. Because a lot of people that go to these community churches are people of the community, and many of them are probably not voting because of their them not really understanding, right? But I digress. So there's so many different reasons why I do believe that people don't vote, but I also believe that we have to use our voting rights as our voices sometime. And in order for people to take us seriously, we need to make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to do. We need to know, we need to also understand that, you know, the representatives are the people that's supposed to know your neighborhoods, your schools, your hospitals. They're supposed to be able to go into these places and see what's going on, right? Senators are, they're supposed to be able to help with like just keeping your state healthy and getting things passed for your state. And then we have Congress, right? We know that Congress rules like the federal stuff, Medicaid and health insurance, Head Start funding for children, maternity mortality stuff, guns and safety. We know that these people kind of do all these things. So the representative in your town is really your first go-to. And then it trickles down or trickles up from there to go to the right, or go, get things passed. So it's important that you know your representatives, that you have conversations with them, that you ask them questions if you see them. And for representatives and people and the Senate and stuff like that, you guys need to come into the communities and talk to your people so they know who you are, right? Um, usually, I feel like we get stuck on wanting people to just make us feel good, and we don't really hold them accountable for not doing their part. So, like, if someone has like a happy hour, or someone's having a cookout, or someone's having something to prove that they're in the community, like people fall on that and they're not really paying attention to what they have or have not done within the community. And those things are important. I always look to at character, at someone's character, the morale that they have. If you're willing to hurt someone else to get to where you are, you don't deserve to be in spaces that's supposed to protect our community. And those things are important to me. So when I'm looking to vote, I'm always looking at that. How is this person on a daily basis? Is this person trustworthy? Does this person have the best thoughts for us? And so these things are important. Um, hmm, what else can we talk about today? There are some limitations to voting. So you need to know what you need to vote. You need to make sure your license is your ID is right. You want to make sure everything looks the same. You want to make sure that you're in your right district, because some people would go to the wrong place, and because they're mad, they won't vote. So I would say always, like, when you do register to vote, call your registrar's office, give them your address, ask them where you're supposed to be, so that you don't find yourself in a space where you get frustrated once you got to a poll and turn around, because some people do that as well. Also, ride transportation barriers, like, especially in a lot of the cities, transportation could be hard, but that's why the early voting is super important, so that you can vote early. So when you have a moment to go, I would say do it. When you have a ride or it's a good day to go out and vote, go do it once early voting opens, right? Sometimes people say the schedule, their work schedule, but voting polls, I think, open at like 6 a.m. and close like 8 p.m. There's got to be some time in your life where you can get up and go vote. But again, that's why early voting is important, because I know I was reading that between Bloomfield and West Hartford, they had the highest rate of early voting, right? And if you really think about the people who won, it was in those districts. Like, they cover some of those districts. So you gotta, use that early voting, guys. Learn more about it, right? We definitely have some gerrymandering going around where, there are some political districts who will dilute black and brown voting power by, making the voting process really difficult, and, making it less appealing. And so a lot of black and brown people won't do that. I mean, I would just, like I said, early voting, if you can do it, it just helps. And also, too, like, don't allow anyone to deter you from casting your vote. So if you got to go to a different place, go to a different place. Just get your vote in. That is so important. So if you have a felony, call your registrar of voters office, ask them questions. If you feel like you can't vote because of your background, don't feel like, oh, I can't vote because of this, that. No, call and ask, what can I do if I'm this person? Because they'll tell you what you can and cannot do. Right. So those are the things that I would suggest that you do, and pay attention to. But I also know that these are some of the things that people use as excuses that they don't vote. And I honestly will say, make sure you vote. Make sure you're doing what you can to get your vote in, and educate people around you. If you're in a home where you have a bunch of children, or if you're in a home where you have a lot of, like, traffic, talk to the people around you, like, tell them about voting. When primaries are coming up, start having discussions about, like, who's up for voting, and all those types of things. This is a time to start having conversations. So I hope it was helpful this evening. Like I said, I'm not a politician, and I just want you guys to know that if you need to know about voting, if you're lost, if you don't understand it, you have a registrar of voter in your town. Call them, ask questions, go on your town city halls or town hall sites, read about it, go down to the city hall, ask to speak. There are things that we can do to have better understanding of why we need to vote. Call someone who in your family or a friend, ask them questions, Google, go to the library. We have to do better. We have to use our voices. We have to vote. We have to allow our votes to be our voices, because sometimes that's the only way we're being heard on how we vote. We should not only be voting for a president, because by the time, if we're only voting for a president, we're putting everybody else in there that may not be, that may be writing laws and, writing policy that is not for us. A president can only do so much, y'all. But all the different levels are there to protect each state and to be able to write policy and give us what we need within our state and our local areas. We cannot think that a general election where we're voting for a governor or we're voting for the president is all we need to vote, because I think those are the bigger turnouts, like when we're voting for governors and we're voting for presidents. But we got the senators, we got representatives, we have all these other things. I told you, we have all these other pockets that we need to be voting for. So we need to find out when it's time to vote, and we need to find out how we cast our vote, and we need to find out, why are these people even worth me voting for? So you want to do research, you want to have understanding of why you're voting, but stop not voting. Stop complaining about things if you're not adding to the solution. If you're not trying to make things better, then you shouldn't be complaining. And again, if you don't vote, that means you did vote. You voted for the other person. You gave another person the opportunity to come in and not do what is needed within your communities. And so we have to do better. We have to remind ourselves, especially as Black and Brown people, that our vote is our voice. And in order for anything to change, we have to keep voting, and we have to show up, and we gotta hold people to a standard that if I voted for you, then yes, I'm going to hold you accountable. So when I see you not doing something, yeah, you're going to hear from me. You're going to get an email from me, and you may not like it. But if we vote, if we pull together and do what we need to do, I think that we can get more things done within our communities, especially in our Black and Brown communities, and stop just hiding our faces or feeling like they don't listen anyway. So I'm not going to worry about it, because when you don't vote, you're shutting off your voice, right? And when you don't vote, you're causing other people to come in and change things, even if you don't agree with it. So that's all I got for y'all tonight. And I hope this was helpful. But I did want to be able to talk about it a little bit, and give you guys some feedback. I pray that you guys will talk to someone about voting and the importance of it. And maybe the next time voting is up in November, I pray that you guys will bring one person that maybe haven't voted in a long time. When primaries come up, if you're a person like myself who vote in the different smaller elections, bring somebody. Like I said, I was able to get 3 people to go vote. And to me, it may not seem a lot to you guys, but that's a lot. That's a lot. Those are 3 more votes that were counted that may not have been counted if I didn't get in touch with them and gave them something to think about. So sometimes we don't think people are listening, but people listen. And I'm not saying to beat people up, but when you educate people, they have a better want. They feel like they're more drawn to want to do something when they're being educated and not just being forced or yelled at, right? So that's all I got for y'all tonight. I pray that you guys have a wonderful, wonderful night. It's your girl, Dr. Tasha Rose, your transparent sister in women's healing. And remember, I love you and God loves you too. Peace.